If you're a business owner who is constantly putting out content on your podcast, on your YouTube, on social media, whatever it is, and that content is not getting you the ROI that you want, it is not bringing you real revenue and sales, then there's one change that I'm going to share with you today that you can make to your content that might turn things around. And before you make this change, you might be experiencing one of two problems. Problem number one is you put out content all the time, but you get nothing out of it. No reach, no engagement, or very little at that. And you just don't see the reason for continuing to do this. Or even worse, you might be putting out content that gets no engagement and no reach, and it feels really salesy because you're talking about your products and services all the time, and it just really sucks because you feel salesy, nobody's buying, and nobody's happy in this scenario. And so today I'm going to share with you a bit of a mental shift that you can make when you think about your content that I think will make it so that your content performs better, it gets better engagement, better reach, and also it brings you more sales to your product or service, which is the reason that you started creating content in the first place. My name is Kevin. I'm the founder of Grow the Show, and I've helped hundreds of creators and coaches transform their content into a sales engine by doing this one thing differently. And the idea to share this shift with you today actually came when I was helping a friend and reviewing his sales calls. So I have a friend who just recently started a consulting business, and he recently started doing sales calls. And he knows that I have done a lot of sales calls myself, and I have managed teams of sales reps. And so I understand how sales calls should go. And he asked me if I would give him some feedback. And so I said, sure, absolutely, would be happy to help. He sent me a recording of one of his sales calls where the prospect did not buy. And as I watched and as I saw him get to the point in the sales call where it was time to pitch, I knew immediately that this person was not going to buy. And sure enough, as soon as he started talking about what he was offering, the product, the package, the details, the prospect's shoulders slumped, their eyes kind of glazed over, and I could tell right away that he lost the prospect. But the real shame is that that call would go on for 90 minutes. And at the end, the prospect said, let me think about it. Let me check my budget. And they sent a follow-up call. And then 4 hours later, the prospect emailed and canceled the follow-up call and said, it's not in the budget. But it wasn't a budgetary problem. It was because of the mistake that my friend made as he was about to pitch his product. And that's that he missed the thing that the prospect has to believe before you start talking about your products and services. Now, this episode that I'm making today was inspired by that sales call that my friend had, but I see this issue happen all the time with the folks that follow me and the people that I work with. And this problem that I'm about to reveal can be solved through your content. Okay, so why did this prospect disengage? Why didn't they buy? Well, it's because my friend got to the turn in the sales call, which is where you go from asking questions about their problems to pitching your product or service as the solution to their problems. And he missed what I think is the most important part of the process. It's the part that primes people to be ready to buy. And it's the part that I try to make happen in my content before they even get onto the sales call. And so what's the thing that you need to understand here? What is the slight shift in your mind that will make your content more effective and your sales process even easier? Well, that is this. In order for somebody to buy your product or your services, they actually need to be sold on two things. Yes, they need to be sold on your product, right? So you have to sell the product to them. But especially if you are a coach or consultant, an agency owner, someone that is selling expertise, you must first sell them on your process. So they must first be sold on the process before they can be sold on the product. And so where we're going to go with this is that you want to make it so that your content sells your process, and then your sales call or your sales page sells the product. If you separate those two things, your sales process becomes easier and your content performs better. People love it. And it does the job of selling them on your process. And so here's why this is important. And here's why you want to separate out these two things. Your product is likely not going to be that much different than the other products that are out there. For example, if you are an online coach or you have a high ticket hybrid program, most of the time, your product is going to look very similar to your competitors or to other people in the space. You're going to have course material. You're going to have a community component. You might have one-on-one coaching calls or group coaching calls. And you might have some other leveraged resources, like maybe some AI chatbots. That's what I provide to my clients, just different things like that. But it's all not that different. And here's the problem with that. Most of the people that we're talking to at this point have already bought something like that. They've bought into a program, or they've hired an agency, or they've done something that looks eerily similar to what you have. And so when you start talking about the coaching calls and the one-on-one calls and the homework and the course material, and you start saying, hey, this is how we're going to solve this problem, all they hear is work. Number one, they're like, oh, listen to all this work I'm going to have to do. And also they're going to immediately start comparing your stuff to the stuff that they've bought before that looks eerily similar to yours. And most of the time, that is not a comparison that you want them to make, because most online programs are super mediocre and charge a lot of money. And a lot of people have been burned by these things, and they've committed to never buy anything like that again. So if you're trying to sell your product, your services, whatever it might be, and you start talking about the features and the benefits, which is what everyone says you should do, people's eyes glaze over. They're like, more coaching calls, more courses to watch, more homework to do, and they're out. But if you instead first focus on selling your process, which is the part that makes you unique, a couple of things happen. Number one, when you walk through your process, the roadmap that you or your product will take people through in order to get from point A to point B, what you do is you explain it in usually a 3 or 4 step process or framework. And with each step, you explain why that step is crucial and how it's going to help them get from point A to point B. So I'll give you my actual example. The process that I take people through in order to take them from the point where they're podcasting, they're posting on social media, they're trying to grow their business and get more sales, but it's just not working. They're not getting anything out of it. They're wondering whether all this time is a waste, whether they're wasting money on these things. I take them through 4 steps. Step number 1 is making their content growable, getting really, really, really specific behind what is the content that you're creating, who is it for specifically, and what is it going to do for them. From a podcast perspective, which is usually what I help people with, we say we need to make your show growable first. We need to have good branding behind your content so people know who it's for and what it's going to do for them. We do that because without doing that, people are confused. They don't know what they're going to get, and they're not even going to press play on any of your content because they're not sure whether or not it's for them, right? So that's step 1. Step 2 is understanding retention, keeping the attention that you get. Step 3 is understanding conversion and how to get people to go from consuming content to buying. And then once we have all that stuff in place and we fix all of the holes that you have in that process, then we talk about growth. Then we enact growth strategies that bring you more organic growth and get more people through that system. So those are the 4 steps that I take everybody through. Now, probably even now, if you've never heard of me before, you're like, man, that sounds good, right? Like that sounds like what I need, right? That is the goal. And here's the deep, dark secret behind that. All of the content that I put out is there to educate you further on those steps. Everything that's out there, all the content that I put out, hopefully gets you to believe that these are the steps that you must take in order to get from point A, where you're putting out content and you're getting nothing out of it, to point B, where you're putting out content, your audience is growing and it's bringing you sales. That is my process. Now, I need somebody to be bought in on that process before I mention anything about my product. I'm not talking about coursework or one-on-one calls or group coaching calls or masterminds or worksheets or AI chatbots or anything that I offer in my paid products or services, because none of that matters. What matters is the process that someone needs to go through in order to get the transformation. So when my friends started talking about all those features and benefits and all that stuff, what the prospect heard was growth, and they couldn't link all of that work to a specific process that will get them where they want to be. So the advice that I gave to my friend was, hey, first of all, are you putting out content that talks about your process? No. You should start doing that. That's going to make your sales calls way easier. But step 2, even if you do get on a sales call with somebody who hasn't consumed any of your content yet, the first thing you do is you sell them on the process. This is step 1. This is step 2. This is step 3. Does that make sense? Do you see how by doing those things, it's going to solve the problem that you have? Okay, great. Any questions? You do? 100%. Now we can talk about the product, which is going to help you achieve those 3 steps. Are you with me? Cool. So that's how you handle it on a sales call. But again, the hack here, the big, deep, dark secret is if you can get your content to do that work for you, where every single piece that you put out somehow educates them and sells them that this process is the best way for them to get from point A to point B, then number 1, your content performs better because it's so educational and because people get real value from it. Like they can hear your content and they can go do it themselves, and that's okay. But there's so many amazing people out there who have no interest in doing it themselves. They hear you in your content talk about the process. Where that leads them is, that's awesome. I don't want to do all that on my own. Let me see what products or service they offer that can just handle that for me or guide me along the way. And that is when you start talking about your product. Okay, here's how we help you get this. You know how I said how step one, we need to get really clear behind your audience? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have a one-on-one call where I ask you a bunch of questions that pulls out the language that describes your dream client and your dream audience member. So now I've gone from, hey, you get on a one-on-one call with me, which feels like time, it feels like scheduling, it feels like work, to, hey, I'm going to meet with you and personally guide you in getting step one right. And at that point, people are like, oh, wow, that's what I need. And again, the more I can get somebody to come to the call with me, understanding the framework and my process, the easier it is for them to see that it is a great fit and that they should hire me and that they are going to get a return on investment if they work with me on my team. So here's what this means for you. If you're somebody who is putting out content to try and support your business and you're not talking about your process at all, my challenge to you is right now, today, or at least this week, put out an episode that just summarizes what your process is and why the steps are there and how it helps people get from point A to point B. If you're somebody who's ever made a webinar, it's similar to that, where you kind of just turn the webinar into some free content. It's just there's no pitch at the end. And if you do that, I virtually guarantee that some people that are currently in your audience now, but don't understand your process, they haven't heard you talk about it yet, are going to buy your stuff because they're going to be like, oh, that makes tons of sense. Let me work with them to make that happen. And hopefully with time, if you continue to put out content that educates people on your process and helps them to do your process themselves, your business will grow because you're going to get way more interest. You're going to get more leads and you're going to get more people asking, hey, how do I just have you do this for me? And that is when you're at the point where you're putting out content, you're getting an ROI because it is leading to sales. And by the way, the people who buy are amazing clients and customers because they're already so bought in on you and what you do. So that is going to do it for this episode. Whether or not you're somebody who does sales calls, you are somebody who would benefit by injecting your process into your content. And above all else, understand that before somebody buys your product, they must first believe in and be educated on your process, because that is what makes you unique and that is what makes people want to buy your products and services.